If you're here for a clean war story, click away now, because what I'm about to tell you doesn't end with medals. It ends with a sound that still wakes me up at 3 a.m., metal grates trembling under my boots. I was a U.S. soldier in Vietnam, and there's one place I never escaped, even after I flew home, the tiger cages. From above, we called it security, questioning, necessary pressure. But from below, it was a slow, invisible kind of death, one that didn't always leave blood, just silence. I'm not telling you this to blame a country. I'm telling you because I became the kind of man I used to fear. And the prisoner I helped break said one sentence that followed me across the ocean: "You will bring this home." He was right. So stay with me, because the real horror isn't what happened down there, it's what happened inside me, and how easily it could happen to anyone. I don't tell this story in daylight. Daylight makes everything look clean, like it can be explained, like it can be forgiven. In daylight, you can line up dates, name units, list operations, and pretend that the order of events is the same as the order of truth. But truth, for me, lives in shadows. It starts with heat, the kind of heat that doesn't sit on your skin. It climbs inside you and won't leave. I arrived in Vietnam young enough to still believe in simple categories: good guys, bad guys, mission, victory. I carried those words like armor. Freedom, security, communism, containment. They sounded like adult language. They sounded like purpose. And I needed purpose because fear was already there, quiet, constant, and humiliating. Fear of ambush, fear of jungle silence, fear of the sudden pop of gunfire that could change a name into a telegram, fear of being useless, fear of being called weak by men who hid their own shaking hands behind jokes and cigarettes. The first time I saw the prison complex, what people later called the tiger cages, I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. That's what you learn quickly. Judgment is a luxury you don't think you can afford. In war, you trade it for obedience and a thin illusion of safety. From above, the place looked like a structure built to erase individuality, long stretches of concrete, metal grates like ribs, narrow openings, a walkway that felt like a border between those who could breathe and those who had to bargain for air. I remember the sound more than the sight, not screams. Those would have been easier in a sick way because screams announce themselves. No, it was the smaller sounds, the scrape of boots, the clink of gear, the dull vibration of metal under your weight, the pause in conversation when you leaned forward to look down, like the air itself didn't want to carry words in that place. I was told the prisoners were dangerous, hard people, fanatics, men who would kill you without thinking. They were VC, spoken like a single syllable, could swallow an entire human life. It was easier to accept that than to accept the other possibility, that the bodies below were mostly just bodies, hungry, exhausted, stubborn, terrified, human. The first time I made eye contact with one of them, it wasn't dramatic. No movie moment, no cinematic stare down, just a quick glance upward, and then the eyes dropped away as if he'd learned that looking at us was a mistake. That glance did something to me. It didn't make me kind, it didn't make me brave, it made me angry. Angry because I felt seen. It's a strange thing to admit, but shame can turn into cruelty faster than any ideology. I was ashamed of my fear, ashamed that I didn't feel heroic, ashamed that I wanted to go home even though I'd barely arrived. And here was this prisoner, someone I'd been told to despise, who looked at me for half a second and reminded me that I was just a boy in a uniform pretending to be a man. So I reached for the only power I had. I reached for the language around me, the jokes, the slurs, the shrugging explanations. "Don't think about it," an older guy told me that night. "If you think about it, you'll freeze." Freeze. That was the word. Like our minds were machines that could lock up if they processed too much. I didn't freeze. I learned to compartmentalize. The next day I was assigned to duties that brought me back to that walkway. I told myself it was temporary, just a rotation, just helping out. I told myself the same lie soldiers tell all the time, that being close to something doesn't mean you're responsible for it. And for a while I believed it, until the first interrogation request came down. It wasn't phrased like cruelty, it was phrased like necessity. We need information, my superior said. We need names, routes, caches. If we don't get it, more of our guys die. He didn't say hurt them. He didn't say break them. He said get it. That's how the machine works. It never asks you to be evil. It asks you to be useful. I remember holding a long stick in my hands at one point, simple wood, like something you'd use for a tent. It felt absurd that such a plain object could turn into an extension of authority. My hands were sweaty, my heart was too loud in my chest. I didn't want to be there, and I wanted desperately to look like I belonged. And that's where my story truly starts. Not with ideology, not with orders, not with enemies. With a boy who was afraid of being called weak. I wish I could tell you I resisted. I wish I could say I stepped back, refused, walked away, did something that would make me easier to listen to. But confession isn't a performance. It's a wound you stop bandaging because you've realized the bandage is part of the rot. I stayed, I looked down through the grates, and I told myself the people beneath me were less than human. Because if they were human, then what I was about to do would have a name that I couldn't carry. And I was not ready to carry it, not yet. That night, I slept for maybe an hour. I dreamed of metal bars under my feet, and every time I stepped forward, the bars became thinner until they turned into wires cutting into my soles. I woke up with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Outside, the night insects sang like nothing was wrong. Inside, I felt something new, not guilt, a kind of cold anticipation. The feeling you get when you know a door is about to open and the person who walks through it is going to be you, just rearranged into something you won't recognize. In the morning, I shaved like a ritual. The razor scraping my face was a small, controllable pain. It gave me the illusion I was still a normal person doing normal things. Then I put on my uniform and walked back into the place that made normal feel like a joke. When you're close to a system long enough, its language becomes your language. You start to speak in abbreviations and euphemisms. You say processing instead of detaining. You say questioning instead of what it really is when fear becomes leverage. You say pressure like it's a weather report. The first time I took part in what was called questioning, I kept waiting for someone to stop it. Some adult, some authority, some moral line that would flare up like a red warning light. But nothing flared. People moved around with the bored efficiency of men fixing a truck. That terrified me more than anything. How ordinary it looked. I didn't see myself as cruel. I saw myself as scared. I saw myself as a necessary tool. I told myself I was helping, that I was preventing ambushes, saving lives, that any discomfort I caused was smaller than the pain our guys would feel if we walked into a trap. I swallowed those explanations like medicine, but medicine can be poison when it's taken to numb your conscience. There was a prisoner, young, maybe around my age, who barely spoke. That silence became an insult to the men in charge. They hated silence because silence doesn't validate your power. Silence doesn't let you win. I remember leaning over the grates, feeling my stomach twist and forcing my voice into something hard. "Talk," I said. He didn't. And something snapped inside me, not anger at him, but panic at what his silence implied, that my threats were meaningless. I did what I'd seen others do. I performed the role I thought I had to play. I pushed at the edges of him with the tools allowed to me. I used a stick, not because it was the worst thing, but because it was easy, because it created distance, because it let me pretend I wasn't touching a human being. I'm not going to give you a manual of pain. I won't describe it like instruction. What matters is not the mechanics. It's the moment my mind made a choice. The choice was this: to protect my image of myself, I would diminish someone else's humanity. That's the core of torture. That's the engine, not information, power, and fear. The fear on both sides. Afterward, I told myself it was minimal, that I hadn't really done anything, that I'd just prodded him, that he'd lived, that I'd made him cooperate. But the truth is, I didn't do it to make him cooperate. I did it so my hands would stop shaking. I did it so the older men wouldn't laugh at me. I did it because I wanted control over something in a country where everything felt like a trap. Later in the mess hall, someone slapped my shoulder and said, "Good job." The praise hit me like a drug. I hated myself for how good it felt. That night I couldn't eat. Every bite turned to grit in my mouth. I kept seeing the prisoners' eyes, how they didn't plead, how they didn't perform for me, how they just existed stubbornly like a fact. When you do something wrong, your brain tries to make it make sense. Mine started building a wall of justifications. He would have killed you. He chose this. You're at war. It's them or you. Everyone does it. It's not personal. But in the dark, personal is all that remains. I began to notice details I'd ignored, how thin some of them were, how a cough would travel down the line like an infection, how men joked too loudly to cover the quiet, how the guards had their own little superstitions. Don't look too long, don't lean too far, don't think about what you're doing. One afternoon, I heard a prisoner sing, softly, almost under his breath. It wasn't a triumphant song. It was the kind of melody you hum to remind yourself you're still alive. A lullaby, maybe. A thread. The sound crawled into me and stayed. Because if someone can sing down there, then they are not a monster. They are not a symbol. They are a person holding on to a piece of themselves. And if they are a person, then what did that make me? That question became my new fear. Not the jungle, not the mines, not ambush. The fear that I had crossed a line and that the version of me who existed before that line was gone. You think guilt shows up like thunder? It doesn't. It's quieter. It arrives as insomnia, as irritability, as a sudden hatred of your own reflection, as an urge to clean your hands until the skin breaks, as the way your heart jumps when you hear metal clink, because your body remembers the sound of grates under boots. I started drinking more. I started joking more. I started smiling in photos like a man who was fine, because the machine rewards you for looking fine. And I wanted the reward. I wanted anything that would keep me from thinking too hard. But thinking is patient. It waits. It follows you. And every time I looked down through those bars, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like tears that refused to become tears. I felt a voice inside me whisper, "This is not what you came here to be." Then another voice, colder, answered, "This is what you are now." There's a particular kind of moment that breaks a person, not the loud moments, not the explosions, but the quiet pivot where your story about yourself collapses. Mine happened on an afternoon that looked ordinary. The air was thick. My uniform stuck to my back. The walkway shimmered with heat. Men moved around like shadows with rifles. We were working. We were doing our job. We were playing our roles. A prisoner was brought in, older than most, with hair going gray at the temples. His body carried the language of hardship, but his posture was strange, not proud exactly, but steady. They wanted him to talk. He didn't, for hours. The officers grew irritated. Irritation is dangerous in a place like that. Irritation turns policy into improvisation. Improvisation turns into cruelty. They called for pressure. I was there. Of course I was there. By then I was part of the rhythm. He looked up at me once, longer than the others had. His eyes weren't pleading. They weren't defiant. They were assessing. And then he spoke in English, not perfect, but clear enough. "You are afraid," he said. It wasn't an insult, it was an observation, like a doctor describing a symptom. My face burned, my chest tightened. I felt exposed in a way that no enemy fire had ever made me feel exposed. "You don't know me," I snapped. He nodded slightly as if he'd expected that. "You think this makes you strong," he said, glancing at the stick, at the position I held on the walkway, at the distance, "but you cannot sleep. You will bring this home." That sentence hit me like a bullet, because I hadn't told anyone I couldn't sleep. No one knew about the dreams, the clenched jaw, the way I sometimes woke with my hands gripping the sheets like bars. No one knew about the moment in the mess hall when the smell of metal made me nauseous. No one knew that I'd started to fear my own mind more than the enemy. And suddenly, In the middle of that concrete place, I felt something I didn't want to feel. I felt seen, not as a soldier, as a human being doing something he knew was wrong. I wanted to punish him for that. I wanted to erase the feeling. I wanted to step on that moment and crush it so I could go back to the numb routine. Instead, I froze. Not because I found courage, because I found shame so large it pinned me in place. The older men barked at me to do something, to handle it, to prove I was still useful. And I did. I hate writing it, but I did. Not with details you can sensationalize, not with gore, with the same small cruelty I'd practiced, the kind that looks manageable from the outside and rots you from the inside, the kind you can later describe as not that bad if you want to lie to yourself. But in that moment, the prisoner's words were already inside me. You will bring this home. Afterward, I walked away from the cages and vomited behind a building. My hands shook so hard I couldn't light a cigarette. My body had finally stopped cooperating with my explanations. That night, I sat on my bunk and stared at my boots. I imagined those boots on the walkway above those grates, above those bodies. I imagined the sound my boots made, casual, confident, unbothered. I tried to pray. I didn't even know who I was praying to. God, my mother. Some version of myself that still deserved to be listened to. I heard laughter outside, guys playing cards, telling stories, pretending we were invincible. I couldn't join them. I felt like a ghost living among the living. That's the thing about regret. It isolates you. It makes you think your sin is unique, even when you know logically that you were part of a system built to multiply sins. I started noticing other cracks. The way some men avoided looking down for too long, the way a sergeant's voice would soften when he mentioned his daughter back home, and then harden again when he stepped into work mode, the way a medic cleaned his hands too often. We were all haunted, but we pretended we weren't. One day a rumor spread that outsiders, journalists, investigators, someone with cameras might come through. People got nervous. The machine hates being observed. It functions best in secrecy. It functions best when it can claim everything is procedural. I remember a commander saying, if anyone asked, you didn't see anything. He said it casually, like a reminder to check your gear. That's when I understood the system knew it was wrong. If it were righteous, it wouldn't need hiding. And that realization didn't make me brave. It made me terrified, because if we were hiding it, then someday someone would uncover it. And if someone uncovered it, where would that leave me? I started imagining a future version of myself standing in front of my own child, being asked, "What did you do over there?" I couldn't find an answer that didn't taste like rust. Sleep became a battlefield I always lost. I'd close my eyes and see the grates. I'd hear the prisoner's English in the dark. You will bring this home. I tried to drink it away. It didn't leave. I tried to laugh it away. It didn't leave. I tried to bury it under patriotism. It didn't leave. Because moral injury isn't a wound you can cover with a flag. It's a wound that asks one question over and over, patiently, relentlessly, who did you become? And the worst part was the answer, I became the kind of man I used to fear. When I finally left Vietnam, I expected relief. I expected the plane to lift, the land to shrink, and my body to unclench. I expected the war to stay behind like a bad dream. But the prisoner was right. I brought it home. At first it came as small things. I startled at metal sounds. I avoided crowded places because the press of bodies made my skin crawl. I couldn't stand under bright overhead lights. They reminded me of interrogation rooms, of surveillance, of being watched. People asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine. That's what men like me say. Fine, lucky, grateful, proud. Inside, I was hollow. I'd be in a grocery store and suddenly smell damp concrete in my imagination. I'd hear a cart clink against a shelf and feel my heart slam like it was trying to escape. I'd see a drain on the floor and think of the cages. I'd be driving at night and see street lights flicker like the sun through barred windows. I tried to tell myself I'd done what I had to do. But that explanation kept collapsing under the simplest truth. No one made my hand move. No one made me choose cruelty over conscience. War creates pressure. Yes, it pushes you. It distorts you. But in the end, there is always a moment where you decide whether you will participate. And I participated. It took years before I could say that sentence out loud, years before I could stop hiding behind the words orders and mission and enemy, years before I could admit the more terrifying truth. I wasn't just following orders, I was following fear. I was following the desire to belong. I was following the need to be seen as strong. I married. I tried to build a normal life. I tried to love like a normal man. And sometimes I did. Sometimes I laughed genuinely. Sometimes I held a baby and felt my chest break open with tenderness. And then I would remember the greats, and the tenderness would curdle into something like poison. Because how do you hold a child and not think of the boys you helped cage? How do you teach your child about right and wrong when you have built your adulthood on a lie you can't fully confess? My wife once asked me softly, late at night, do you ever think about it? I said no. I said it like a reflex. And that was the moment I knew my guilt wasn't just hurting me, it was hurting the people who loved me. I had become a man who lived with a secret, and secrets leak. They leak into your tone, your patience, your ability to be present, your capacity for joy. I began to have nightmares where I was the one below, not because I wanted to make myself the victim, but because my brain was trying to teach me empathy by force. In those dreams, I would look up through bars and see a faceless figure leaning over the grates. I'd feel a stick press into the space near me and I'd want to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. Then I would wake up in my own bed in my own country, and for a few seconds I couldn't remember where I was. The fear would be the same fear. The shame would be the same shame. I started reading history, accounts, testimonies, not to excuse myself, but to stop lying about what the war was. The more I learned, the more I understood how systems manufacture cruelty. How institutions create rooms where responsibility gets diluted until everyone claims innocence. That didn't absolve me. It sharpened my guilt. Because I wasn't just a victim of propaganda, I was a volunteer for numbness. I chose the easier path, to stop feeling. And if you stop feeling long enough, you stop being the person you promised yourself you'd be. Eventually, I went to a support group. I sat among men who had different stories but the same haunted eyes. We spoke in fragments at first. We laughed too loudly. We avoided the worst parts. We said things happened. And then one night, in a room that smelled like old coffee and cheap chairs, I finally said it. I hurt people who were trapped. I did it because I was afraid. I did it because I wanted to look strong. And I regret it so much I can't breathe some days. No lightning struck, the ceiling didn't collapse, the world didn't end. But something inside me shifted. The secret had touched air. After that, I tried to find a path that wasn't just self-pity. Regret without action is just another form of selfishness. So I did what I could. I donated quietly to organizations that support survivors and families. I spoke carefully, respectfully, about the ways systems can turn ordinary men into instruments of cruelty. I stopped romanticizing the war. I stopped telling the clean version, and I wrote this, not as revenge, not as propaganda, not to claim I am a good man now. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't get to ask the people below those grates for anything. I don't even know their names. That's part of the horror, how easily a human being becomes unknown inside a machine. I am writing because there is a lie that keeps repeating itself in every war, that cruelty is inevitable. It isn't. It is chosen. Sometimes in small, cowardly choices that add up to a life you can't live inside. If you are listening and you are young and you think strength is domination, learn from the ruin of men like me. Strength is restraint. Strength is refusing the role that asks you to trade your humanity for acceptance. The prisoner told me I would bring it home. He was right. I carry it every day. And the only thing I can do now is refuse to let the story be redacted, not the part that makes me look good, the part that makes the truth visible. Because the truth is the only thing heavy enough to keep me from becoming that boy on the walkway again.